What's going on, guys? It's Paul here with the brand new Zoom F2 Pocket Field Recorder, which in this video I'm going to be comparing to the tried and true Tascam DR-10L. Now, just as a quick introduction, the Tascam has been a pretty great field recorder for me for the last 3 years or so, and I have especially found it helpful that it has a dual record feature. So if I ever happen to peak levels in my main track, I have a backup track at a lower gain level. Now, with this new Zoom, you don't even need dual recording. You don't even change input levels. This thing can record in 32-bit float. So that's the main difference, but there are a lot of other differences between these two recorders, and they both have their pros and cons. So I'll be covering all of those differences as well as doing some testing in this video. Now, I'm not being sponsored by either one of these companies, and I paid for both of these recorders with my own money at full price. And speaking of that price, as of the time of recording this video, the Tascam sells for $199, and the Zoom, they have two different versions. One is with Bluetooth, one is without. This is the Bluetooth version, which also sells for $199, and the one without Bluetooth is $50 less at $149. For the size of these two units, you can see they're both very small. The Zoom is a little bit shorter than the Tascam, but they're about the same width. And as for the thickness, they're about the same thickness as well. The Zoom may be a hair thinner. As for the weights, according to my scale with batteries and SD cards, the Tascam weighs in at 2.23 ounces, and the Zoom weighs in at 1.97 ounces. One difference between these two, or at least what's included with them, is that the Tascam does come with a nice zippered carrying pouch, whereas the Zoom does not come with anything to carry it in. However, they do both come with lavalier microphones. So before we move on to talking more about the recorders, let's go over the microphones. Both microphones use locking 1/8" connectors, and as for the quality of the connectors and the cables, I would say they're pretty much identical. But when we get to the capsule end of the microphones, that's where things get a little bit different. The Tascam has a very small windscreen behind a hard mesh. It has a nice metal clip, and overall, it's a very small microphone. Now, the Zoom, on the other hand, is a good bit larger. As you can see here, it has a very large foam windscreen that just covers over the top. And this little clip here is entirely plastic. Now, one difference between those two is that there is no way to really adjust the angle of the microphone with the Tascam clip, but you do have some angle adjustment with the Zoom clip. The Zoom clip does feel fairly cheap and delicate. The one thing that I like about it is that it has a little notch right there, so you can loop the cable around and tuck it into that notch. And since we're already talking about the microphones, I'll go ahead and do an audio test with them. But just for reference, what you've been listening to so far in this video is the Deity D3 Pro, which is being recorded directly into the Sony A7C. Also, I've found that I get a little bit of bassy reverb off this table, so I'm going to step back by a couple of feet to test these microphones. You are now listening to the audio of this recorder and its included microphone. I'll normalize these levels to -23 LUFS, but no other post-processing will be done. I'm currently in a 12x12 room that is carpeted, but it is not otherwise sound treated. You are now listening to the audio of this recorder and its included microphone. I'll normalize these levels to -23 LUFS, but no other post-processing will be done. I'm currently in a 12x12 room that is carpeted, but it is not otherwise sound treated. In my initial testing with these microphones, I was quite surprised when I used them with the Zoom H1N because I found out that the Zoom microphone was approximately 8 dBs more sensitive than the Tascam. I'll now switch to recording in the H1N so you can hear the difference for yourself. You are now listening to the audio of the Tascam microphone being recorded into the Zoom H1N at an input level of 7. You are now listening to the audio of the Zoom microphone being recorded into the Zoom H1N at an input level of 7. Okay, we're now back to the audio from the Deity microphone. And if you hear a little bit of background noise, it's because my wife has the washer and dryer running now, but that's okay because we're back to talking about the recorders themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about the build quality because both of these are made primarily out of plastic. However, the plastic of the Zoom has a little bit of a cheaper feel than the plastic of the Tascam. Also, the battery door is something that I want to mention. The Tascam, if you can see that, has a battery door that hinges open and then clicks back together. Really easy to swap out the battery for that one However, on the zoom, it's on the face of the recorder, and you have to like press in and out at the same time, and it's kind of difficult to do. And oftentimes I feel like I'm going to break the little plastic clips on this battery cover when I open it up. And speaking of batteries, both of these units are powered via AAA battery. However, the Tascam only uses one battery and the Zoom uses two, which amazes me that the Zoom is still a lighter weight recorder even though it uses double the battery. Now, I want to do a battery life test, and I haven't had a chance to yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a battery life test after I post this video. I'll start with brand new batteries and see how long these units will record for, and I'll update the results of that test in the description below. Both of these units can also be powered via USB, so the Zoom has a USB-C port right on the top there. You can power it that way. And the Tascam, because it's a slightly older recorder, it still uses micro USB, so there's a micro USB port there. And right next door to that is the SD card slot. So both of these recorders use micro SD cards, but the Tascam has a 32 gigabyte max on the card, whereas the Zoom, you can use up to 512 gigabyte cards with that recorder. Now, because I'm nerdy like that, I did some calculations, and recording 32-bit float audio with a 512 gigabyte card, you should be able to record for just over 30 days straight. Moving into audio ports, you can see on the very top that both units have a locking 1/8 inch input. The Zoom also has a locking 1/8 inch output, but the Tascam has an output on the side and it is not locking. As for controls on the Zoom, all the buttons are on the face, so you have your output volume, pause and play, and then you have your on-off switch, which you can also turn to hold to lock any buttons, and you press this button here to record. Now on the Tascam, you do have a few buttons on the side here. There's a switch that is the power switch, and that doubles as the record switch when you pull it up. And there are two buttons here to control the output volume. Then on the face, there are a few buttons here that are mostly used for navigating the menu. And that brings me to what is probably the biggest advantage that the Tascam has over the Zoom, and that is the display. So if I power this on, you can see it is a very tiny display. However, it's enough to, navigate the menu, etc. So once it powers on, if I press the menu button, you can see things like mic gain, low cut, limiter, auto level. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see all the various features that you can access through the menu. If I press menu again, it will go back to the main screen, so you can see your most recent audio file name. There's also a battery level indicator on the side here, which I would say has so-so reliability, tends to drop really quickly. And then there's also an audio level indicator at the very top, which you can not really see right now, but I'm going to come back to that later. Now this is where you start to see the benefit of having the Bluetooth version of the Zoom F2. So if I switch the unit on, and I'll grab my phone, open the F2 control app, it's going to search, and once it connects there, I have access to some general information here. Current record time, estimated time remaining on the SD card. There's also a battery level indicator, which is only 3 bars. Really hope that they change that in maybe a future version. There's input level, output volume, some general controls here. You can start and stop recording. You can also place markers, which is something you can only do with the app if you have the Bluetooth version. And if I go to the menu, you can see there's Finder, so you can navigate the SD card and look at your previous recordings. There's the low cut filter, a couple of record settings, and some system information. Now, one thing that I've noticed about using the app is that as soon as you connect the app to the F2, all the buttons become inactive. So you can press all the buttons you want to, it won't do anything until you disconnect the app. The only control that you have is switching the power button from on to off. Otherwise, it's entirely inactive, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. Ultimately, I just kind of wish that they gave you control over that. If you want to play back any of your previous recordings from the device itself, with the Tascam, it's pretty easy because you just use the on-screen menu to navigate to any previous recording and then just press play. With the Zoom F2, you can press play, but it will only play the most recent recording, at least as of the current firmware. So you can use the app if you have the Bluetooth enabled version and go to Menu, Finder, SD card, and then you can see all of your previous recordings. And you can select one, but when you press play, it's still only going to play that through on the device itself. From what I've found, there's no way to play it on your phone or download the audio files to your phone. Zoom also has a computer app which will work with either F2 version, so Bluetooth or not. You connect over USB and then you can change settings that way. However, you don't have the ability to use any audio controls or start and stop recording from that app. In fact, you can't even start and stop recording on the body pack while it's connected to the computer. Overall, I would say for the PC app and the cell phone app, as of right now, I would give them about 3 out of 5 stars. They're functional, but they're not the most intuitive. I mentioned that I was going to come back to the audio level indicators, so now I have an audio source playing into both devices at the same time, and I'll show you with the Tascam. You can just barely see up here at the very top. There's a little audio indicator up there. If I turn down the audio source, you can see that it goes away. I can bring it back up. And it's a little hard to see, but you at least do have an audio level indicator. On the Zoom, on the other hand, if you can see that, it's just another little LED up here at the top. So if I turn down the audio source entirely, it goes away. And their version of an audio level indicator is when I have a low signal, it's a dim light. And then when you turn it up, it gets brighter, which you can probably not even tell on the video. And then if you really peak, which is kind of difficult to do with the 32-bit float, it will eventually start flashing. Now with it being 32-bit float, you're not really as dependent on the audio level indicator, but at times it is just nice to see, and that's again where it's nice having the Bluetooth version, because when you connect that, if I bring the audio level in now you can actually see a lot better what your audio level is, and you can actually see once you're getting up to peaking there. As I mentioned earlier, being 32-bit float, you don't even have an input volume control. You just plug it in, record, and then you adjust your levels in post. On the Tascam, you do have a mic gain, so if you press the menu button, that very first option there is mic gain. You can enter that. And you don't really have a lot of options. You just have low, medium high, and high plus. I did some testing of each of those levels back whenever I first purchased the Tascam, and I found medium to work pretty well for general dialogue. In fact, there may have been one time in the last 3 years that I ever had to change that. I almost always leave it on medium, and that has worked really well for me. So now to test the 32-bit of the Zoom compared to the 24-bit of the Tascam, at that medium mic gain with dual recording turned on, I have the audio out from my computer split, so the same audio source is going into both devices. Since I know that the two included microphones have different sensitivity levels, I'm hoping that doing it this way will be a slightly more accurate comparison of just the recorders themselves. So what I'm going to do is start recording on both devices, and then this first test is going to be trying to recover a very low audio signal. So I'm going to start a song clip playing from my computer at a very low volume. Now here in Adobe Audition, what I'm going to play through in the first set of clips is the audio directly out of the recorders as is. And this next set of clips that I'll play through are those same clips, just normalized. And now I'll play through a silent section of those same normalized clips, just so you can hear the noise. So I'm going to start both devices recording again, and for this next test, I'm going to start at a slightly higher volume, and then I'm just going to slowly increase the volume at a constant speed and see at which point each track begins to clip. Now with this test, I'm not going to do any normalizing, so you can see all of the audio levels as is. However, because of that, I'm going to go ahead and mute the 2 Tascam tracks just so that you're not listening to blown out clipped audio the entire time. And if I start right here and play through just listening to the zoom track, what you can see is I've placed a marker here, and this is the point at which the original Tascam clip begins clipping and distorting. Now I'll play through a little bit more. And ultimately, this marker is where the Tascam backup begins clipping. And if I continue to play that here, right there at this marker, this is where the zoom begins to distort originally. Now the amazing thing about 32-bit float is that if I open this individual file, what you'll see is that I can drag that down, and I've got about an extra 6 dB before the audio starts to actually clip. So if I go back to my multi-track, and I'll play that through now, it's still perfectly clean until it gets to this final marker. Now I knew going into this that the zoom being 32-bit would be a larger file size than the 24-bit of the Tascam, but I was curious to know how much larger. So I did a test, and in a 1-minute audio clip in 32-bit float with the zoom, it was 11.6 megabytes, and the Tascam was in 1 minute 8.8 megabytes, but that's just for one file. So when you include the dual recording, which was a second 8.8 megabyte file, that comes out to 17.6 megabytes, which is actually a good bit larger than the zoom. I'll spare you all the calculations, but ultimately what I found out is that compared to the dual recording of the Tascam, you'll actually get about 34% more recording time on an SD card using 32-bit float with the zoom. Now when you're ready to format a card, in the Tascam it's really easy because once again you just navigate in the menu to SD card format, select yes, and you're good to go. On the zoom, you have no way of formatting the card from the device itself, but I really expected to be able to format it from the Bluetooth app on the cell phone, but no, there's no way to do it. The only way to format the SD card in the zoom is to connect it to the computer app. So with all of those differences covered, if you want to know which one I would recommend for you, I would say it really depends on your purposes, but unless the Tascam does start to come down in price, I would say the zoom is the better buy. What I know is that for me personally, the features that the Tascam has that the zoom is missing are mostly features that I rarely used anyway, probably with the exception of the SD card formatting. And then there's the big kicker of the fact that the zoom has 32-bit float recording. That's really the whole reason that I purchased it. Now, in my YouTube videos for this channel and my other channel, I rarely actually use a lavalier. I've started using the Deity D3 Pro for most of my work, and one of the reasons I purchased this is because I want to be able to record this microphone into 32-bit float and have a nice small compact setup. In fact, because I haven't been able to find one, I've been considering designing and 3D printing a hot shoe mount for one of these so that I could easily mount it on the camera or right next to my microphone. So I'm going to pin a comment about that below, and just give that comment a like if that's something you'd be interested in as well. I'm also considering doing a more full in-depth review of the Zoom F2 once I've had a few months to really work with it, so subscribe if you'd like to see that video in the future. If you found this video helpful, you can leave it a like. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.